Hello and welcome to the Comic Cave. I'm Ramsey, aka Captain Away, and today we're looking at the 1982 limited series, Contest of Champions. I just love how absolutely wasted Dazzler looks on the cover here. Everybody else looks surprised or angry, but Dazzler looks like she's just tripping balls, dude. Maybe I'm coming around to John Romita Jr. after all. In 1979, the world was gearing up for the 1980 Summer Olympics. Marvel joined in, planning a big crossover special that would see the return of the games-loving Grandmaster, a character that first appeared in Avengers 69, nice, as well as combining essentially every Marvel superhero on Earth together into one location for the first time ever. The only problem is, the then Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, which would lead to a decade-long war. With this still being the Cold War years, the US attempted to convince the USSR to back down by boycotting the 1980 Olympics, which were to be hosted in Moscow. With the USA backing out of the Olympics, it felt like poor taste to release a story celebrating the Olympics, so the crossover was dropped. Only, apparently nobody told inker Pablo Marcos that the story was canned, so he eventually finished the work on the series. Never one to let a good thing go to waste, Marvel decided to release the story after all, in 1982, removing direct references to the Olympics and releasing the story as a 3-part miniseries instead of a one-shot. The explosive success of such a massive crossover of Marvel superheroes from all over the globe would lead Marvel to creating a sequel of sorts 5 years later, a 2-part story, this time in the pages of West Coast Avengers and regular Avengers Annuals from 1987, which is also included in the collection, so I'll cover those stories as well. So will this Contest of Champions live up to the spirit of competition we expect from Olympic origins? Let's find out and take this away. The comic opens on a bunch of faces. Or maybe they're masks. I hear if you collect them all, you can become the fierce deity. Speaking of fierce deities, these heroes of Earth are being observed by 2 figures. One, the Grandmaster, and the other, not yet identified. The pair are making a wager of life and death where a game shall be played utilizing the heroes of Earth as their unwitting pawns. So across the world, heroes begin to just mysteriously vanish. The Avengers, the Soviet super soldiers, the Fantastic Four, Alpha Flight, and the X-Men all as groups, and then various individuals just up and disappearing one after the other, from Dazzler mid-performance on stage, to Kazar and Sheena pulled out of the Savage Land, to a number of characters across the world that had only appeared maybe once or twice before this, or were getting their very first appearance here just to make the story a more globe-spanning sensation, until we have an entire giant stadium filled to the brim with superheroes. And god dang, what a spread. Like, I pretty much take back every mean thing I've ever said about John Romita Jr. for just this double-page monster alone. I mean, he clearly hadn't developed his blockhead style yet, so this actually looks like respectable comic art. I'm sorry, I couldn't help making a jab. Let's not fail to appreciate Pablo Marcos for his inks, or Andy Yankees or Patricia DeFalco for their amazing color work on this page. This was more than a decade before digital art. They did all of this by hand, and I'll be damned if that's not insanely impressive work on all their parts. The location is a sports stadium that is floating in space in Earth's orbit, created by the Grandmaster and the entity he'll introduce here as the Unknown. Grandmaster explains that the plot here began with another Elder of the Universe, his brother the Collector. The Collector was recently killed by Michael Korvac, an extraordinary, powerful being from the 31st century who had come back in time and kicked off the storyline known as the Korvac Saga. That I didn't cover because, I don't know, I didn't think about it, I guess. When Korvac was defeated, the damage he had caused to the universe was undone in all ways except for returning the Collector to life. Because returning an ancient immortal being back to the land of the living required power even beyond that of Korvac. But the Unknown has the power, for reasons that are honestly probably obvious, especially if you've watched some of my other early videos. But that's the stakes in this game anyway. Grandmaster chooses one team and the Unknown chooses another. And then the 2 teams compete to collect pieces of a shiny golden globe. The people of Earth and the superheroes not chosen to compete will remain frozen and unable to move if the heroes refuse to participate, leaving the heroes without a choice but to play in the game. Then, if the Grandmaster Grandmaster's team wins, the Collector is restored to life, and the Grandmaster promises to not use the people of Earth in his games ever again. If the Unknown's team wins, the Grandmaster's life will be forfeit, but the life of the Earth's sun will be extended by several million years. Seems awfully optimistic of Vanguard to assume that there will be life on the planet still at that time, but, you know, communist. So, optimistic? The two entities both choose 12 champions, and I'll go into who's on each team when I get to the actual matchups, but they do specifically say that they're not including any Immortals, Inhumans, Atlanteans, Eternals, or non-Earthlings to avoid any unfair advantages. The teams hardly look balanced to me, though, but that's probably because the original dialogue almost certainly was about them choosing representation from different countries, as you have Canadians, Americans, British, Russian, African, Japanese, French, Australian, Argentinian, Irish, Israeli, Chinese, Saudi Arabian, and German competitors. But remember, this isn't the Olympics. As with the Avengers Defenders War, most of the comic is just direct 1 versus 1 matchups. So let's get on to that. We start in the Frozen North with the Grandmaster's team of the Australian Talisman, the American Daredevil, and the Russian Darkstar, up against the Unknown's team of the Japanese Sunfire and the American Sue Storm and Iron Fist. Each of these chapters will unfold in the exact same way, with the members of each team sort of greeting each other before immediately splitting up to go off on their own, where they then end up in a fight with one person from the other group who did the same thing. Here the matchups become Invisible Girl, as she's still called by this point, against Talisman, Sunfire against Darkstar, and Iron Fist humorously enough ending up in a snowball fight with Daredevil. Daredevil really plays up his blindness as a handicap in this story, which is interesting because it seems like it's usually seen more as the impetus to him gaining powers greater than normal human senses, but I guess they just wanted to make sure everyone knew he was blind, and that was the best way they could come up with to do it. Darkstar, who uses an energy known as the Dark Force, attempts to trap Sunfire inside the dark where the light from his fires can't escape. But Sunny refuses to be defeated by a mere woman, his words not mine, and pushes his powers to their absolute limit, which destroys Darkstar's trap and melts all the ice around them, probably single-handedly causing global warming too. Wow. Super sexist and a polluter. Hard to believe I once thought you were cool, SF. The melting ice reveals the piece of the Golden Globe they're searching for, starting a mad dash across frozen waters. To help his team, Talisman uses his bull roar to create the Dreamtime, a disorienting version of reality, but it confuses everybody, not just the opposing team. The least affected are Sue Storm, since she already experienced it some earlier when facing off against Talisman, and Daredevil, whose other senses are less impacted by the change. That advantage, plus his grappling cane, allow him to sneak the piece of the globe out from under Sue's grasp and win the first match for the Grandmaster. Contest 2 is in a ghost town in the Wild West, with the Grandmaster's team of the very American She-Hulk, Captain Britain, of obvious nationality, and the Argentinian Defensor, and the Unknown's team of Iron Man, the Arabian Knight from Saudi Arabia, and Sabra of Israel. Defensor makes his first appearance here, and Arabian Knight and Sabra both would have if the story hadn't been delayed. Instead, they first appeared in some issues of Incredible Hulk, and Sabra is set to appear in Captain America: Brave New World. So if you're watching this from the future, you can let me know how that went, I guess. The matchups here are She-Hulk versus Sabra, Iron Man versus Defensor, and Arabian Knight versus Captain Britain. But the fight ends up getting messy quickly, and there's some spillover between combatants. Iron Man manages to take out Defensor, which accidentally also takes out Captain Britain as well. But while he's distracted by She-Hulk, who just kind of faints for no real reason in a very un-She-Hulk-like manner, Arabian Knight simply sneaks in and grabs the next globe piece, tying up the games. Round 3 begins as the Grandmaster team of the Canadian-American Wolverine, the French Le Peregrine, and America's Blue-Eyed Wonder, the Thing, are put up against a team of the Russian Vanguard, the American Angel, and Wakanda's Mighty King Black Panther. This matchup is probably my favorite for a number of reasons. For one thing, it takes place around the Terracotta Army of the first Emperor of China in Shanxi, which has always been one of my favorite archaeological sites. If you somehow don't know about the Terracotta Army, I highly recommend looking it up. Like, literally everything about that site is just so cool. This also has some of my favorite early interactions among the competitors. I enjoy how annoyed by having a French teammate Wolverine seems to be. Like, dude, you're Canadian. Shouldn't you be used to the French? Also, I love this moment where Black Panther suggests to Vanguard that stealth and cunning might be the best course, but Vanguard dismisses that, asking how they're supposed to use stealth and cunning on a flat plane in broad daylight, only to turn back to Panther and find that he's completely vanished. That's a pretty great moment. Even if the colorists for this issue were clearly having trouble getting Black Panther's correct skin tone. I'm sure it's fine. This also just has the best matchups that seem to have the most thought put into them beforehand. Black Panther vs. Wolverine is obviously a great face-off, and we also see Le Peregrine vs. Angel for some unique aerial combat. Even Vanguard vs. The Thing might have seemed kind of cool during the Cold War, I guess, though definitely that fight ends as simply as I would probably expect. As Black Panther and Ben Grimm are old friends, the battle ends up being resolved peacefully, with BP telling Thing where to dig for the next piece of the globe, despite them being on different teams, putting our score at 2-1 in the Grandmaster's favor. Our fourth and final matchup has a Grandmaster team of Alpha Flight Sasquatch, Captain America, and the German Lightning Man Blitzkrieg, which is honestly such a great name. Whoever came up with that, they deserve a raise. They're up against the Unknowns team of Storm, the Irish Shamrock, and China's very own Collective Man. The matchup here of Storm against Blitzkrieg is honestly kind of fun, in the ridiculous way of someone trying to use lightning powers against someone who can control the weather. I'd really like to see Blitzkrieg go up against Electro. Now that would be fun. Shamrock's luck power give her an advantage against Captain America, leading to this possibly unintentionally hilarious moment where Cap gets attacked by a python and wonders why it didn't bother Shamrock. I just love the expression on his face here. See, Cap? This is why I use JavaScript instead. My favorite here, though, is the Collective Man. I really like his power of being able to split into 5 men, or recombine together to have all their strength at once, even if none of that really helps him against Sasquatch. What's really cool, though, is that he can apparently call on the power of all the people of China at once. I just find that such a fascinating take on the concept of creating a superhero representing communism at its face value beliefs of being a political system of all people equally united, rather than the reality of the so-called communist systems that we actually got in the world. In the end, it's Shamrock's luck powers that win out, and she grabs the globe for her team, and rather than tying things up like I had fully expected would happen, that gives the Grandmaster's team the clear victory. With the contest over, everyone is returned to the arena as Grandmaster celebrates his victory. But Talisman, suspecting something is up, uses his spirit form to pull everyone into the dream state again. Sue, as the one most acclimated to the dream state, is able to invisibly approach the unknown and pull off her hood to reveal that she is actually Death herself. I mean, I'm not really sure why it's a reveal, but whatever. Finally revealed, Death admits that there was somewhat of a trick to her side of the agreement. It seems Grandmaster never watched Full Metal Alchemist, because while Death can bring the Collector back to life, it requires the equal exchange of a powerful life force to do so. The Grandmaster is given the choice between sacrificing his own life or the life force of all the gathered heroes. But since Grandmaster gave the condition that if his team won, it would mean that he would never use the people of Earth again as pawns, he lets his own life be taken and the Collector returns. The Collector and Death then head off on their own to start what seems to be another game, and everyone else is returned to Earth, and the story just ends right there. That's it. But maybe that's why they felt they needed to continue the story in the West Coast Avengers Annual #2. So let's take a look at that next. This comic opens on my hometown, in the Astrodome even. Oh man, I still can't believe you're gone, Astrodome. I mean, you know, Minute Maid Park is cool and all, but the Astrodome was a treasure. I once played the national anthem with my school band on the field before an Astros game there. It was really quite something to be down there on the field looking up at all the stands. R.I.P. ya creepy abandoned old building. Quite fittingly, the West Coast and East Coast Avengers have chosen this 8th wonder of the world as the official site for their company softball game, to see just which coast is the best coast. I think we all know it's neither of them. I'm gonna get angry comments for that. Thor, who, yes, is batting with his, joystick, seems to hit a game-winning home run. But before anyone gets to respond, Silver Surfer comes crashing through the domed roof, followed by cosmic bolts of lightning. When the light is gone, we find the East Coast team to all be dead. Surfer had apparently been trying to warn the Avengers of a threat from one of the Elders of the Universe, but clearly he had arrived a little too late. But believing that they can still save their fallen comrades, the surviving team joins Surfer in visiting the Collector, who informs them that the Grand Master had made a deal with Death to trade the lives of the Avengers for his own. But since the Grandmaster didn't know that the Avengers had split into two teams, it was only the members of the team still using the original name that were killed. The Collector does offer the survivors one chance. If they can prevent the spirits of the New York-based team from reaching Death herself, then they can stop the Grandmaster's plans. So the West Coast team willingly drinks poison, no joke, really don't try this at home, and they're off to the land of the dead. But in the land of the dead, the classic team is being told by Grandmaster that in reality what is happening is that the Collector is playing a game where he's trying to offer the West Coast Avengers to death. So both teams find themselves forced to try and stop the other from what they believe is a trick, so we can again pair off for some straightforward battles. Just to help everyone following along at home, the current teams are East Coast Avengers, consisting of Thor, Black Knight, She-Hulk, Captain America, Captain Marvel, Dr. Druid, and Wasp. While the West Coast Avengers are made up of Moon Knight, Mockingbird, Hawkeye, the non-costumed Hank Pym, Wonder Man, Iron Man, and Tigra. Silver Surfer is also along for the ride, but won't actually end up fighting in the battle. So, ignore him. The East Coast does a fair job of making its case. Mockingbird gets overconfident fighting Captain America and ends up snagging her totally groovy 70s wings on some giant thorns, causing her to be the source of her own defeat. Wonder Man faces off against Thor for a battle of powerhouses, but Thor proves just how mighty of an Avenger he truly is by easily bringing Wonder Man down. Tigra faces off against Dr. Druid and fails to be impressed by his illusions, at least until one turns out to be real, which distracts her long enough for Druid to use his mind control powers on her and take control of her. But the West Coast Avengers are able to hold their own in this battle. Iron Man's armor's ability to absorb and transmit energy allow him to overpower Captain Marvel and her energy-based powers. Hank Pym then faces his own ex-wife in the Wasp. Though Hank doesn't really have powers at this point, he does have inventions. And he also has being an asshole, and knows how to take advantage of Janet's emotions. So he pretends to get knocked out by one of his own weapons, and then when Wasp checks on him to make sure he's not hurt, he takes the opportunity to capture her. Next we have Moon Knight facing off against Black Knight, which I'm sure someone at Marvel thought was a hilarious matchup. Black Knight holds the clear advantage in their fight, so Mooney also falls to deceit for victory, managing to shift his body under his cloak to convince Black Knight he's been stabbed by BK's ebony blade, allowing him to get close enough to knock the Black Knight out. Last up is Hawkeye vs. She-Hulk, a fight Hawk manages to win by hitting Shulky with some knockout gas. Yeah, I call BS on that one. Pretty sure others have tried that trick on her in her own book and it failed, but whatever. The whole fighting turns out to just have been a distraction anyway, as what the Grandmaster was really after was getting this battle in Death's realm going so that Death would be distracted enough for him to take control of her. With Death's power added to his own, the old Grand Slam is now powerful enough to remake the universe, which is exactly what he wants to do, setting off a new Big Bang that will create an entirely new universe, because as one of the oldest beings in the universe, he's bored with this one. Cap asks Grandmaster to give them a fighting chance to save the universe, so Grandy makes several bombs and sends the two Avengers teams out to attempt to stop the bombs. But this time they have as their opponents, the Legion of the Unliving, a group of characters that were seen to have died in earlier issues of Marvel Comics. Because what this story needed was yet another time of breaking our teams down into smaller groups that then went off to fight one-on-one with another opponent. So Thor, Hank Pym, and Hawkeye face off against the Asgardian Executioner, their own former teammate Swordsman, and Nighthawk, who had been part of the Squadron Sinister created by Grandmaster in Grandy's own first appearance. Thor manages to destroy the bomb and they defeat their opponents, though Nighthawk kills Pym by stabbing him with a stalagmite, which is surprisingly dark for this story, honestly. Captain Marvel, She-Hulk, Moon Knight, and Tigra face off against the original Captain Marvel, Drax the Destroyer, Green Goblin, and the Adder. Monica Rambeau Marvel manages to use her energy to destroy the bomb, but her teammates are killed fighting the others in the meantime, and so the 4 members of the Legion are able to team up on Captain Marvel and destroy her energy form. Silver Surfer finds himself alone facing off against Korvac. Michael's power is far too great for even the Silver Surfer to face, but in his arrogance, he doesn't notice Surfer flying them both into the Grandmaster's bomb as it explodes, killing them both. And I know I keep saying killing despite the fact that they're already dead, but that's the logic that the comic is using, so, you know, I don't know what you want from me. Anyway, next up, the Black Knight, Mockingbird, Iron Man, and Dr. Druid face off against the original Black Knight, Red Guardian, Tyrax the Tamer, and even Dracula himself. Hey, that's 2 events in a row Old Fangface has shown up in now. Nice to have you here, Drac. And I have to pause here to point out that I really love Mockingbird's literal mocking of Red Guardian. She goes straight for his manhood, and it's great. When he says he would have preferred a greater challenge, she points out that he's dead because he lost his last battle, so he can't really stand up to greater challenges, and says that a lot of men are like that, unable to perform when the pressure's on. Excellent banter, lady. Have a gold star. Mockingbird's great. The team mostly beats their foes, but Iron Man gets distracted while attempting to disarm the bomb and it goes off, wiping out a full 1/5 of the universe according to Grandmaster. Our final group is Captain America, Wonder Man, and Wasp, who face off against Baron Blood, an old vampire enemy of Cap's from World War II, as well as the Superman knockoff Hyperion from the Squadron Sinister, and Cap's own former sidekick, Bucky, who taunts Cap about whether he's managed to kill any other sidekicks yet, in a line that, you know, competes pretty well with Mockingbird's own mocking. Maybe Mockingbird should be Bucky. I think I just created something horrible. At this point in the timeline, Bucky was considered officially dead. The whole Winter Soldier thing wouldn't happen for decades yet, but Bucky's not the only inconsistency here. Dracula, for example, who never really dies, or Green Goblin, who basically didn't die at all, as we'll eventually learn in a much later Spider-Man story. Those later stories seem to contradict this one, but as both Black Knight and Thor kind of point out during their fights, their enemies seem somehow wrong or different, much too dedicated to working for the Grandmaster rather than being their normal heroic selves. So we can probably argue that these were false opponents created by the Grandmaster to torment his enemies, rather than it actually being the characters in the Land of the Dead. It mattered more that the Avengers believed these characters to be dead than it mattered if they were actually dead. Cap doesn't let his feelings for Bucky slow him down, delivering a pretty serious pummeling to the kid, and gets to the bomb and breaks it in time to save the universe. He's then instantly pulled back to the Grandmaster to find out that only he and Hawkeye survived what the Grandmaster is now calling the first round of events. While old Grandy did make a game out of ending the universe, he had the game rigged all along, planning on just repeating the same scenario until the heroes lost. Hawkeye's not having that though. He decides to play a new game, taking 2 of his arrows and placing 1 of his snap-on arrowheads on just one of them. He then gives Grandy a chance to pick the correct one, the one with the arrowhead, to decide the fate of the universe instead. And the Grandmaster's gaming nature makes him unable to resist this game of chance. But clearly Grandy's also never been to a city, because that's a pretty obvious trick. It's just the shell game. Hawkeye simply pockets the shell when he doesn't want to lose, so that both arrows were the wrong arrow. But Grandy was so distracted by this game that Death is able to free herself and take back control from him. She then restores everyone to life back in the Astrodome, and they decide to just start playing baseball again as though nothing had ever happened. I guess nobody soiled themselves when they died, fortunately? Cap does warn Thor to keep a close eye on Hawkeye, since he cheats, and I do feel like that's kind of the moral of this whole story. The West Coasters cheat. And the comic ends revealing that the Grandmaster has been restored to life as well, and is planning on plotting his revenge. Just, you know, as soon as this baseball game ends. Probably. But for now, we'll just get to the breakdown. I think my least favorite part of the story is the repetition of dividing into groups and then dividing into smaller groups and then dividing off to fight one-on-one. And then doing all of that again and then doing all of that again. But considering this is technically two different stories collected together, it's hard to really hold that against the story. That also might be less of a problem for me if the fights were more interesting or seemed to be as well planned out or as epic as some of the fights we saw last week in the Avengers Defenders War. Those kinds of more personal fights were clearly abandoned in favor of giving the Olympic spirit to the story, which itself then got abandoned for the final product. So I'm giving this series a recommendation level of medium. While significant for really being the first of its kind in so many ways, its impact outside of that is relatively low enough that I don't think skipping this story will exactly hurt. The collected edition gets 1 shiny golden globe, which is a good thing. It's shiny and it's gold. How is that not a good thing? It didn't need to collect the sequel stories from the Avengers Annuals, but it's really good that it did. Especially because I probably would have hunted those issues down anyway in order to include them in this video, and I'm glad I didn't have to do that hunt. So thanks for making my job easier, but also just because it makes the collection feel more complete. Aside from that, it also includes an introduction from Tom DeFalco, as well as the amazing full alphabetical list of basically every Marvel superhero from the time period that was originally published at the end of each issue. And a bunch of bonus art, including some of the inked pages pre-color, and art from other editions of the collection, including the absolute garbage cover of the collection from 1999. That looks like it was a poorly photoshopped picture of some WWF wrestlers. And the title is placed awkwardly to make it look like the Grandmaster has an Ed Grimley cowlick going on. Just everything about this cover is garbage, and I'm so glad they included it. I do have one gripe with the collection, and that's that the pages have these weird sidebars on them that totally give away the ending. That's death right there. Spoiler alert, Marvel, come on! Thanks everybody for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I did not expect Avengers Defenders War to be the video that kicked this channel back into high gear. I expected the Kree Skrull War to be a bigger deal, but glad you guys seem to be enjoying it. I'm having a lot of fun this summer covering all these major Marvel events, and I will continue doing so until I kind of run out, or, you know, it gets to be September or something. I don't know. So next up will be the big one with Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars. So if you're excited about that, or you just like this video a lot, or you just enjoy the spirit of competition or whatever, then make sure to click all the likes and subscribes and all those things on the YouTube so you can be sure to be here next time, and I hope to see you then, right here in the Comic Cave.